One of the things I like to do when people walk away from a Zoom call is try to read the books on their bookshelf. You do have a nice, colorful array. What's the big black book?
This one,
Yeah.
that is the Tanakh. Most of the Zooms that I do down here in my office are related to the Jewish social justice organizations that I work with.
Uh-huh. Not to be obsessive about, but what's the blue book? It looks like a Greek classic.
These are all Jewish books of various ilks. This is the Union Prayer book, which is the prayer book for Reformed Jewish services.
It does have a good scholarly presence on your bookshelf.
And most of them I've actually read too.
Even more impressive.
I tell you what, the most impressive book that I have read all of, including the footnotes, is this one, the Jewish Study Bible, which is how many pages?
Many, it looks like.
Many, and they're very thin. It's in the realm of,
I'm going to guess 1,300.
it's very thin paper, 2,260.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and that is not large print. And
oh, good Lord.
especially not the footnotes, which run along the side in Talmudic style. And I read every damn footnote.
I salute you and your industriousness. Well, moving right along, welcome to Fair Folk at Work. As many of you know, generally the theme of this podcast is how has fair influenced one's later life indirectly. My guest today is somebody whose fair life influenced his professional life throughout his life. I'm talking, of course, about Jess Winfield. Jess, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And it's so nice to see you again. So let's jump right in with the traditional Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who was the first person to say to you, let's go out to fair? And what did they say to get you out there?
So I had actually heard about the fair from the time I was a wee lad. One of my neighbors, Jennifer Landon, who still works at the fair, runs the larger hat concessions there, was my first childhood playmate and one of my first. And she worked the fairs regularly, she and her mom and her older sister, in the late 60s. And I'm pretty sure that they would have said, oh, you should come out sometime. So that would have been the first time I was invited. The first time I actually went would have been many years later, just after my senior year of high school in 1979, when my friend Adam Long, who would then become my longtime business and creative partner, he had been going for a couple of years at the urging of our friend Shelley Cowan. And I went out with him that spring to the Southern Fair with my then girlfriend, Denise Pinkston, and I recall it fondly because we had one of our first kisses on the kissing bridge.
Were you in high school theatricals?
Yes, I was. High school and junior high. Started doing theater in 8th grade at Colina Middle School, where we had an excellent drama teacher at the time, and then all throughout high school. Did some of the high school classics like Up the Down Staircase and Our Town, but also some more offbeat stuff like Tom Stoppard, The Real Inspector Hound, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
What type of roles did you aspire to or fulfill in your high school drama career?
Well, I played the good-looking asshole teacher in Up the Down Staircase, which was approximately the male lead, I think. I tended to play the sort of Englishy roles. I played Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
I had an idea as I was walking the dog about 20 minutes ago for a sort of an improv taking you back in time process. So it might fail tremendously, but let me take a moment and explain it. Imagine you are Jess Borgeson, age 17, never been to fair, but you're taking a shower and you're imagine yourself 20 years in the future accepting an Academy Award. So you are yourself, never done the fair, never heard of the fair or much, and you've gone on a theatrical career, but not influenced by fair. I'm going to play the part of the fawning press person. You're going to be the person who has just been nominated for an Academy Award. And I'm going to talk to you about your fictional career, say between the age of 18 and where you are now, somewhere in your mid-30s. Does that make sense?
Sure. So I have had obviously a very successful career in the theater, but not having anything to do with the fair.
Correct. Or with films, whatever you dreamed of at age 18 as being your overnight success, and you're like 25 or 30 or something like that. You're a worldwide phenomenon at whatever you thought you would be a worldwide phenomenon when you were in high school.
Okay. I can do that. I can do. So I would like to thank the Academy and all of my other fellow nominees whose work I so admire. Great competition. How many other screenwriters are there who can say that they've not only shared an awards ceremony with, but triumphed over such people as Tom Stoppard and Shane Black and the amazing, well, I don't want to name all of the top names in the best original screenplay category, but
Mr. Borston, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why do you think your work resonates both with critics and the popular audience?
Well, I actually think that my thorough grounding in the classics, which I studied extensively in the English department at UC Berkeley and in the Latin and classics department, my grounding in not only Greek and Roman theater and poetry, but early Renaissance and Old English poetry and Elizabethan theater.
But the critics have said, and I think they're right, is that you managed to update those classic themes so well. Why do you think that you are so uniquely qualified to bring the ancient world to a modern life?
For that aspect of my work, I would have to thank the influence of Monty Python and Bugs Bunny, Rocky and Bullwinkle, certainly. For someone who studies Latin and Greek and early modern theater, I also have a supreme love of pop culture.
Well, I think that's reflected in your Latin translation of Scooby-Doo that came out last year.
Yes, it's true. It's funny, this is actually not fictional, but I also use my fascination with Mesoamerican classical culture in pitching a Scooby-Doo television series not long ago with the discovery of an underground Mayan city that was haunted by the ghosts of the sacrificial victims.
Well, I think in that you are indeed ahead of your time. Not too many people can, first of all, see that parallel, but then actually realize that vision and make it a universal truth rather than a Scooby-Doo truth.
I wish the vision had been realized, but alas, and they're sucking it now because I have the Oscar in my hand. Scooby-Doo was the one and only television series that decided they no longer required my services partway through the development of the series. One and only.
Well, I'm sure they're kicking themselves now, and they will continue to kick themselves as you accumulate Oscar after Oscar.
May they kick themselves over and over and over again with increasing force.
Well, thank you. That was fun. What was the title of the Scooby-Doo project?
That was a series that ended up being, I think it was called Scooby-Doo and Guess Who, where they did
Oh,
where it was all celebrity guest stars, which aired, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. That actually would have been fun, but that was
I
not.
think Scooby-Doo and Bullwinkle would be a nice project.
There you go.
Imagine those two powerhouses sharing the same screen.
Yeah, which one is going to be the brains of the group? That's what I want.
But back to the fair.
Yeah.
That first time you went out to the fair, what were among the first things you noticed out at the fair?
I noticed that I had horrible hay fever, which persisted throughout the many years I worked at the fair, which really diminished my enjoyment of it, I have to say. I mean, obviously, it was the physical setting was beautiful. It was also pretty familiar to me because I grew up at Lake Sherwood, which is just a couple of ridges away from Paramount Ranch. The physical beauty of the place, and also obviously just the immersive nature of the experience theatrically, that once you walk through those gates, you really do feel that you are part of a 16th century small village fair. I mean, it's effective enough that you suspend the disbelief of looking past all of the tourists with strollers and glasses of beer and get sucked into the performance and to your part in the performance.
What performances do you remember as being, wow, look at that?
Yeah, well, the first performance I saw, I would have sought out my friend Adam, and when I found him, he was doing a little street bit that he liked to do, where he would gather a crowd by letting a blob of drool fall slowly from his mouth towards the dirt while standing, mind you, and then suck it back into his mouth just before it hit the ground, to the amazement and oohs and ahs of the surrounding audience. So that would have been the first thing I saw. And then the only other show I remember seeing that day would have been Cock and Feathers Wizard Show, which I thought was, of course, pretty hilarious, which it was.
Do you remember a particular bit or line that they did that resonated with you?
Well, I remember thinking that Sandy Grin, especially, was just an extraordinary performer. And the way he commanded a stage as the evil wizard Murkmouth Grumblemore terrorized the audience just with a look while still making it funny was, I think, very influential now that I think about it on various character bits that I've done over the years.
It sounds that you were attracted to the sort of physical bits that are not writing sort of at all.
The nature of performing at the fair is that physical comedy not only goes over better, but goes over at all in some places and at some times, because the audio challenges.
Why don't you elucidate those for listeners who might not be aware of?
Yeah, well, I mean, theaters are outdoors. They are designed for people to walk by and see performances happening and then come and sit down and watch them. But you have ale stands ringing bells every time someone gives a tip, and food stands hawking their wares, and the ring the bell game, bing, ta-da, bing, ta-da, bing. And that's just the all day long background noise. That doesn't even include the times when the Queen's Parade goes by, bells are ringing, or the Scots go by with the halberdiers singing their songs, and it is freaking loud. And aside from having an incredibly powerful voice like someone like Will Wood does, which I never have had, I quickly learned that I had to rely on physical comedy, which had not particularly been my long suit.
And I think Elizabethan language doesn't necessarily translate to a modern audience. I mean, by the time the audience processes the three double negatives, the weird language, and the funny little pun at the end, it's like 10 minutes later that something in their brain might go, oh, that was clever. You can't educate an audience in Elizabethan quick enough to cajole them to pay attention to the clever literary puns that can so easily take over a script.
Or as we say in the intro to our Shakespeare shows, we're going to cut all of the subtle characterizations, clever dialogue, and wordplay and get straight to the sex and killing. Swordplay and dick and boob jokes always played much more successfully than witty banter.
I was talking with a lady who had actually talked to Phyllis Patterson. It was all the learning through play. And she was quite proud of the fact that people came for the beer and the turkey legs, and they could leave talking about Hamlet. And
Right.
that you are one of the people who've performed Hamlet more than anybody else in the world. And so there is this sense that it's silly and there's turkey legs, but there's also a sense of there is some kind of education going on. And I think what you guys did was a really good job of finding that sweet spot.
Yeah, well, I think I've had, especially fair brats, kids who grew up at the fair thing. I learned everything I know about Shakespeare from you guys when I was a kid. And one who said, I was actually shocked to go to high school and find out that Romeo and Juliet was not a slapstick comedy in the original. Yeah, I think that the whole fair experience was designed as and functioned as an educational experience, not just for the people who came to see it, but for the people who were doing it. I mean, the 3 weeks of workshops prior to opening where we all learned the basic fair accent and everyday Elizabethan life and units of currency and weights and measures and all that sort of thing was at least as good an education in English early modern history and culture than any reading that I did on the subject, even at the university level when I was studying it. And when I was writing my novel, which is set partially at a Renaissance fair and partially in 16th century England, I knew all that stuff, what an Elizabethan menu was like, and an Elizabethan kitchen could and couldn't serve, what Italian theater companies that came through would have been treated like, and various things about the Queen's travels and progress during the summertime. I didn't even have to research that because it was ingrained into my head.
And pores because it was dusty.
Yes, exactly.
What, why don't I ask this as a two-part question? In all the other shows, not yours, what was sort of the funniest bit you saw, and analyzing it, what was it?
I mean, God, there's so many, it's hard to know where to begin. I mean, I have to mention the entire bit of my future wife saw getting an enchanted bucket stuck on her head and trying to get it off throughout a play written by a couple of guys, Mark Celine and
whatever his name was. Yeah.
Some other guy.
The shorter one.
That was just hilarious and worked so well at the fair because it's such a visual gag. Never mind the fact that Saw was saying very, very funny things, as everybody was, and ad-libbing a lot of very funny stuff. You could see from the back that this was something funny because there are people running around with, the scene where Mark would enter as Sigfa's mother and trip and fall and have the oranges that were his fake breasts roll out onto the stage.
And the little sounds of distress he would make as he tried to run after them into this audience.
So that one sticks out. I loved in Pyramus and Thisbe, the drowning come tears, confound, when first Mark and then Jay would get a nice dose of water in the face, capped by the performance at the very last day of the Renaissance Fair on that site, which I don't know if you recall, when we did a running gag where we had like 10 different people with cups of water running out, spitting water on Jay Downing, and then running backstage to get more water, so that there was like a 5-minute long constant stream of water being spat on him. That and the slow motion fight scene in the Cock and Feathers show, also just brilliant and hilarious, and so perfect for the fair, because it was A, silent, B, very physically funny, and C, in slow motion, so people could actually process what was going on, which was often a problem, as you mentioned.
I think, easing into funny thing you guys have done, another component is that if it refers to something earlier in the play that has seemingly been discarded and comes back, then you top it. One example, I guess, is oob. Well, why don't you explain the joke oob?
When the Reduced Shakespeare Company, which ended up being Adam Long, Daniel Singer, and I, did Hamlet at the fair. It was a 20-minute long show with a couple of encores. We do Hamlet first in 17 minutes, and then we do an encore version, which is about a minute long, and then we do a 2-second version of it, and then we do the minute-long version of it backwards. Backwards as in B2 not or B2 dialogue, and physically it's as if you're running a movie backwards. Everybody starts dead, stand up, they pull swords out of each other's bodies, and they end up alive and well. And
the happy ending that Shakespeare dreamed of.
Yes. In the long version, which in our show was about 17 minutes long, Adam played the ghost of Hamlet's father. And during the encores, he didn't have time to do a full costume change or anything into the ghost. So he just had a rustic little canvas and wood and rope sign that hung around his neck that said boo, which was funny. Ha ha, he's the ghost. Then in the backwards encore, he picks up the same sign and holds it upside down and says what it says, ooh.
The first time I saw it, I thought it was hilarious. And it's one of those things that amuses me. Having seen it at least 50 times, it always gets a laugh from, because oob. And it really comes out of nowhere. You're not expecting, even though it's backwards, and it's a surprise and recognition and visual all at the same time. And it's like thrown away in it's really fast. And if you get it, you get it. And if you don't, you don't. But if every joke was oob, the world would be a better place.
Well, having performed those encores enough times, it does seem sometimes like every joke was oob. There's actually another funny one of those callbacks involving the same character in the show that came about really by accident, a great case of necessity being the mother of invention, where we used to have, for the first time the ghost appears in Hamlet on the battlements of Elsinore Castle and doesn't have any lines. We used a fairly elaborate ghost puppet on a string that would dangle over the stage, and Horatio and Hamlet would be, look, my lord, it comes, angels and ministers of grace. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And all that, which was funny enough that it was a puppet on a string, that then there would be a cock-a-doodle-doo from off stage, which signified dawn, and the ghost would go whip and disappear. And one day we were setting up the show backstage for our first show 10 minutes before we're supposed to start, and the puppet had gone missing. Couldn't find it. We had already changed into our costumes, so Sa, who would later become our costumer, and was backstage for her own show. She grabbed one of the socks that I had changed out of, which was a blue striped tube sock, and painted a happy face on it and put a rope around it, a piece of fishing line, and that became the ghost for that show. And it got a huge laugh. So if you go see the show now, not only is the sock with a happy face still in it, but when Adam comes out later as the ghost of Hamlet's father, he's wearing a costume that's just basically a white sheet with two blue stripes around the bottom of it. And there are a couple of lines of it about how the ghost disappeared when the sock crew instead of cock crew. So those sorts of callbacks are the running gags, as we call them.
Or after you have done the fair, you have worked in Hollywood and you have created a niche for yourself, as whenever somebody needs a fair scene in a movie or TV show, that's you. They give you a call.
Well, I may have overstated the case. I've gotten a couple of calls regarding Shakespeare-related animated fare, to use the obvious pun. The most fun one was when I was showrunner on Lilo and Stitch, the television series. And we did an episode where Lilo wins on a radio show. She wins tickets to the, what is it called? The Merry Monarch Fair, which is a Renaissance fair. We just couldn't use the actual name. And as part of her VIP package, she gets her own personal minstrel to follow her around for the day, who very much a la Brave Sir Robin in Monty Python and the Holy Grail continues to ad-lib songs about her embarrassments and misfortunes throughout the day. And it was so much fun because we got Weird Al Yankovic to not only play the songs, but collaborate on the music and lyrics on some of them. Very funny episode. And the character department actually did a tribute to me. I'm the one who welcomes Lilo to the fair. They designed the character after me and I did the voiceover. I put on my best Will Wood voice for that, as a matter of fact.
Can you give me your best Will Woods voice?
Not anymore. Honestly, my vocal cords aren't warmed up enough to, let's see. Lilo, welcome ye to Merry Monarch Festival. Something like that.
I think that gives a very good impression of both Will Woods and the experience of walking under the bridge at the start of fair.
Oh, the other one that was fun, it didn't involve the fair, but did involve Shakespeare, where I did get a call saying, we have an idea for an episode of the Penguins of Madagascar that we think you'd be perfect for, and it will become clear why, where the penguins break into Central Park and have adventures during a performance of Shakespeare. That was a good fun one. That's still bringing in the royalties.
Another aspect that might be a little strange that most people don't have, but is that you get to see people on stage performing as you.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, it's fine because really ideally they're not performing as me. They're performing in some cases shtick that I came up with or jokes that I wrote. But when we went to publish the script of the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, we decided to tell the actors, and it's laid out on the front page of the licensed script. In this show, it's basically about three guys trying and failing to do the complete works of William Shakespeare in an evening, right? But giving it the good college try. And that came about when we had been doing Shakespeare, Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet at the fair in repertory. And when it was proposed that we do the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged and do all the other 35 plays, we literally sat down and calculated, okay, we've rented a theater in Edinburgh with the name Complete Works of William Shakespeare abridged. We have 35 plays to get through that we haven't written material about yet. The current plays take about 25 minutes, so we have X number of minutes 35 plays divided, and it worked out to about 2 minutes per play. So we said, okay, Adam, you take the comedies, Jess, you take the tragedies, Daniel, you take the histories, and we'll go off and we'll write 2-minute versions of every play that we don't currently perform. And a couple of weeks later, we got together and read what we had produced, and it was really dreadfully boring. And not very funny, because first of all, as we learned, the comedies are not nearly as funny as the tragedies. The histories all ran together. So what the show ended up being really was our representation of our own process of going through the 37 plays and figuring out how we could approach them and what we might do with them. And it's like, hey, the comedies are all the same. What if we combined them into one play? Hey, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And so that dialogue that we had when we were creating the play was something that actually made it into the script. And the characters that developed out of that were extensions of ourselves. Jess is the writer. He's the scholar. So he's the one who writes the 16 plays of the comedies all in one. And Adam is the one who doesn't understand any of it. And just,
but it's really loud.
Yes, but he's really loud, and he looks good in drag, and he vomits a lot.
He's enthusiastic.
So that's why we call each other Adam and Daniel and Jess throughout that play. And when we went to publish it, we were like, well, do we leave it Adam, Daniel, and Jess and have whoever is performing it call themselves Jess and Adam and Dan? And we're like, no, that's just weird. So on the front page of the script, we say, use your own names and bring whatever you can to the script. If you have special skills, talents, abilities, if you know how to juggle, throw a juggling scene in. If you can sing, do some songs. So when I go to see other performances of it, it really isn't Jess. Hopefully, it's the person playing the role of Jess and playing the same roles that Jess played in Hamlet in the show, the way they would do it.
Have you ever seen somebody doing Jess? They're doing it as themselves, and they add something where you go, hey, I could use that.
Yes. Why, you yourself, when we were writing the show, your crowd gather, really, I guess, for The Enchanted Bucket was your little 1-minute joke version of Julius Caesar. Or was that? No, was that for The Enchanted Bucket?
I don't really remember. I just remember driving to fair thinking, what does anybody know about Julius Caesar?
Yeah.
They know the Ides of March, and then everybody in the world then says, what's in Ides of March?
Right.
It's again that process of distilling, what does everybody sort of vaguely know about anything? Yeah. And then you just sort of go with that and call it done.
Right. So in the case of your Julius Caesar, when we sat down to write said 2-minute versions of every play, we were like, I wonder if Dan and Mark would let us use Julius Caesar, which we asked if we could, and you said yes. And thank you again and again and again, because that was the one piece that has always worked. I want to answer your actual question, which was, did I ever see somebody playing Jess do something that I then borrowed for myself to perform? The answer has to be no, because we didn't license the play for others to perform until after I had retired from the company. So I was never able to really incorporate anything that other people did into performance. But yes, we have asked other troupes who do funny stuff if we can borrow it for the script of the play that we license. And in fact, we just put out a new revision to the show a few weeks ago, The Complete Works of William Shakespeare, abridged, revised again, that has, several bits that we've seen over the years that we asked if we could borrow.
For those of us who know the show, what has changed?
Well, the impetus for changing it was really to do a post-Me Too, post-Black Lives Matter, sort of more socially inclusive and aware version of the script. So it's been degendered and de-racialized. One of the things we learned from watching other companies do it is that while it's funny for three white men to try to do all of Shakespeare's plays, and it gets into funny territory when it's going to be like, well, who's going to wear the dress and how is the kiss going to work and how are we going to do Othello? We can't possibly do Othello because we're three white guys. So hey, we'll just do a rap instead, and all that's gone. For the better, because we saw versions of it that were all Black, all female, all lesbian, all trans, mixed race cast. We've seen versions of it that all work. It doesn't have to rely on a lot of tropes that are outdated like that. We tried so many times to rewrite the Othello rap and the intro to it, more importantly, to make it both deracialized and not offensive. And it turns out there just wasn't a way to do it. To get to Othello and say, well, it's about a Black guy, so we're going to rap, is sort of innately, it was funny in 1987 and it was unique, and white guys weren't rapping then, but they are now. And it was just weird. So we cut it and went back to the original version, which only has Adam coming out with boats draped around his neck, thinking that that's the kind of moor that was being referred to, was the place where you tie up a boat. And they get into a discussion about how they can approach Othello, and it sort of starts to go off the rails a little bit. And Daniel finally says, hey, what if the boats were awesome and we're done with Othello? And everybody goes, that's good. Let's move on. Likewise, in previous versions, in Titus Andronicus, Lavinia's having her tongue chopped out and her hands cut off are played for some hilarious comedy. Well, we had some feedback from rape victims. So we changed it from getting humor out of her injuries at the hand of her rapist to making it a real revenge play where she's empowering herself by killing her rapist and cooking him into a pie. It's like the discussions we had about that were like, well, is it as funny? And it's kind of like, it doesn't matter. It may be this much less funny, but it makes it 100% better sketch.
Right.
And it won't trigger any rape survivors in the audience, more importantly. The other big change, and the one that sort of met with the most resistance internally amongst the writing team, we were talking about the Jewish books that I have in the background of our Zoom meeting here. And I got fairly serious about my Jewish identity over the last few years. And I grew increasingly uncomfortable, especially with anti-Semitism on the rise in America, and with despots invading countries in Eastern Europe. I got increasingly uncomfortable with the conflation of Shakespeare's biography with that of Adolf Hitler in Adam's biography of Shakespeare.
Oh, the invasion of Poland bit?
Yeah, a very reliable laugh. But again, we had some people who were not just offended, but we had a couple of Holocaust survivors say, why are you doing Hitler jokes? Not funny. And people will say, yeah, but Mel Brooks and the producers, and yeah, that was a long time ago. And anti-Semitism was not then what it is now in America. So we changed it. He conflates the biography of Shakespeare with the biography of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
Which is fine. He winds up buried in a log cabin in Stratford, although there's a monument to him at the mall. It's just as funny. And we actually, and this goes to prove the adage that, comedy is tragedy plus time. We tried various substitutes for Hitler. Walt Disney was one. And the second one that I wrote out was Martin Luther King, but that doesn't end well. And so what's funny about that was after that, we tried Lincoln. Also doesn't end well, but 100 years prior, so it's fine. Anyway, those are some of the major changes. I think it's the best version of the play that has ever been. And I had a Zoom a couple of weeks ago with the cast of the first theater company to perform the new version, which was a high school in Vermont. And it was so perfect because they had double cast the show, so there were 6 performers, of which the 2 Adams were both trans kids. One of the Daniels was gay, and the female 17-year-old who played Jess was Black. And they to a person said, "Thank you so much for doing this and giving us a voice." And the director said, these kids don't feel heard very often. That the fact that you reached out to us to get feedback on what you did, which is already amazing, they're going to remember it for the rest of their life. We're really happy with it, and that'll be coming out. It's available for licensing right now, but it's not in print yet, but it will be soon.
To sort of conclude, I'd like you to talk me through Godzilla, because to me, Godzilla is one of the truly classic, dumb, absurdist, visual things that I've seen both inside and outside of fair that have given me sort of like the deepest laughs of my life. So if you could explain what Godzilla is.
Well, first of all, it's interesting that you think of it as something from the fair, because Godzilla really only made one appearance at the Renaissance Fair, but it was part of the Complete Works show. And
well, by fair joke, I mean really, really funny and visual and absurdist. And conceptually, I think of it as the ultimate fair joke.
Fair enough. So Godzilla. So one of the last plays that we get around to in the first act is Troilus and Cressida, which nobody knows anything about, first of all, right? And as you said, it's very difficult to parody something that nobody knows. So when we get to Troilus and Cressida, even Titus Andronicus, most people know that there's a lot of blood. So that's what we do with Titus Andronicus, is a lot of blood. And Antony and Cleopatra, nobody really knows the play, but they know that Mark Antony
There's a rug.
Oh, and then there's the asp. So that's all Troilus and Cressida is. And we get to Troilus and Cressida, and it turns out that Jess has written his thesis on Troilus and Cressida. So he pulls his thesis out of his pants, which is also a good visual fair joke. I've written my thesis on it. It's great. You guys would love it. It's thick, it's long. I've been hammering away on it for years, and I'd like to whip it out for you right now. Jess, no! My thesis. It's a manuscript. So he starts reading his manuscript, and it's all about authorship markers in the quarto version versus the folio version, and its relationship to the authorship question. And everybody's like, whoa, boring. Jess, isn't there anything in there about the plot? And he's like, yeah, the plot, here in the footnote on page 25. Troilus, youngest son of Priam, king of Troy. It's like, oh, okay, great. You be Troilus, you be the king. Okay. Loves Cressida. Adam says, I'll get the wig. He goes off and gets the wig. And meanwhile, Agamemnon, and people go, Agamemnon, oh my God, just boring. You're just going to turn people off to Shakespeare with all this footnotey Greek stuff. And Adam says, why can't we do something like performance art? I love performance art. It's so pretentious. And Daniel goes, yeah, let's do that. Jess, you read the footnote, and we'll improvise a performance art, modern dance sort of thing. Like, okay, great. So Jess starts to read his footnote, and Daniel starts to do some modern dance interpretive moves, and Adam goes off stage and gets a series of props, an inflatable stegosaurus, glowing moon, and then he goes back and brings out a little tiny Godzilla toy. It's actually called Rex. It's meant to be a T-Rex. And he puts it on the stage and turns it on, and it's this little audio animatronic thing that totters for 2 steps and then raises its arms, its eyes light up red, and it goes roar, roar. And then it stops, and then it takes 2 more steps. Eyes light up, roar, roar. And we staged it so that once Adam sets it down and turns it on, the 3 of us just stare at it. completely
It's clear
unmoved.
you guys have taken giving focus workshops, because the time I saw it, and I was in the balcony, and from the top, the three of you were like laser focus on this little teetering Godzilla thing, but it fell over after the second roar.
Yeah.
It was just one of those perfect timing. The three of you like staring at this tottering Godzilla as if this was like the birth of Christ or something.
Yeah.
And then it just roars really pathetically. And it's clearly absurdist, silly, visual. It relates to the characters you've established through the preceding 20 or 30 minutes. And so it's just a culmination of the three of you reacting in character. It's just, to me, perfect. I mean,
Ah. Well, if anything, it was a little too perfect. We had a running private joke among the three of us that despite the sweat and tears we would go through every night doing Hamlet forwards, backwards, and all 37 plays and physical comedy, and Adam doing 3 or 4 flips during the course of the show and us picking up various injuries. Thing that invariably got the biggest laugh in the show was a cheap Chinese-made toy, Godzilla. Not just, I mean, and reliably too. It was like Godzilla never had an off night. His comic timing was always right on.
when he fell over, he really did take a long time to teeter, because he had this sort of waddling motion as he walked forward and then roared, that you were always subliminally aware that he could fall over. I mean, it was telegraphed in the way he moved, because he wasn't like a lithe panther.
No, he's a slow moving monster, the best kind.
He was very deliberate.
Yes. We had no control over him falling over it. He did occasionally, not very often. So the performance that you saw was a special one. It really would depend on there was a rake to the stage, or, who knows how much essential damage he'd sustained on the previous tour. Actually, when we were doing the show at the Arts Theatre in London in 1992, the stage had a pretty significant rake to it.
Mm-hmm.
He did fall over fairly regularly there, not all the time, but it allowed us to do one other gag that we could only do there, where at the intermission back in those days, Sa, our prop and costume goddess, would come out on stage and clean up the various props that had been scattered around, rubber snakes and dummies and whatever else, which she did on roller skates. And so in Act 2, when Hamlet says, "The time is out of joint, oh cursed spite that ever I was born to exit right," and he would exit right and first smash into the stage proscenium and fall over and get a laugh from that, and then stagger off stage, and we had a crash box off stage. So it sounded like he also tripped over a box of props and costumes or something. And I would take, after my exit, I would take one of the roller skates with Godzilla perched on top and push it out onto the stage as if what I had tripped on was the roller skate. So Godzilla would have a little encore. When I rolled it just right, it would roll down the rake of the stage, and then because of the weight of Godzilla, it would turn and then exit through the escape upstage in the set too. And when that happened, dude, golden. Of course, we could have cheated and had it on a string or whatever and done it reliably every night, but that was not our style.
You left it to the fate of the comedy gods.
Yes,
as it should be left to the fate of the comedy gods.
Indeed.
I think it's time for the last question. It's another sort of fantasy role play thing. You have just won the Phyllis Patterson Lifetime Achievement for stuff learned at fair. The band will not play. You can take as long as you like, but give me your acceptance speech.
fellow fair people. I want to thank Phyllis for this award, although really I feel like it's been misgiven in my case, especially if it's based on my excellence at fair back in the day, because as I mentioned, I had terrible hay fever, was doing 4 shows a day in a black velvet costume on unshaded stages, and I was really miserable most of the time at the fair. And I didn't partake much of night shows and weekends there. I tended to go home and take a shower and try to sleep and try to pull it together to be able to get through the 4 shows the next day. And there are a lot of people who deserve this award more than I do, who not only the people who founded the fair and kept it running for all those years and were the creative forces behind the environmental theater aspect of it and the educational aspect of it, but people who made it their lives and went from state to state and fair to fair and really turned it into the countercultural phenomenon that it became. They're the ones who truly deserve the Lifetime Award for Excellence in Fair. However, since then, I feel like I have done the fair pretty well because it's helped me through so many parts of my career, not only writing scenes at the fair in various television shows, setting my name as Will at the Northern Fair, but just in the approach it's given me towards theater and acting. The concept of all the fair being a stage, being ready no matter how shitty the venue or how difficult the crowd to get up on a stage and just entertain however you know how to do. It's put me in good stead in not only theatrical situations, but in business meetings and Hollywood pitches and book readings. Anytime you have to get up in front of a group of not reliably sympathetic people to what you're doing and force them to be entertained. The fact that I could do it in 100-degree heat with a bunch of drunken, sunburned slobs who just want to eat their turkey legs has stood me in good stead all of these years. And I hope that some of that work that I've done has given some back to the fair.
Well, thank you very much. I once did the Las Vegas Fair, which was truly in a park, and second base was our stage. We were on the softball field, and we got the coveted 1:00 time slot, and then the coveted 1:30 time slot, and the coveted 2:00 time slot.
Oh, no.
So the scheduling geniuses at the Las Vegas Fair, we had to do it back to back to back 3 times. And so we're like, if you like the show the first time, stay in your hay bale because you're about to see the exact same thing. And this was a weekend that there was a fight in town, so there were no like hotel rooms and you couldn't sleep on the fair site. And so the only hotel room was like $500 a night, which was unheard of for a fair performer. And so we all piled into this one kind of suite. 500 divided by 12 is not so bad.
Right.
And I hadn't really thought of that until you said you just learn to roll with whatever is. I would disagree with you in one way. I learned at the fair, most people are rooting for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most people are saying, I want to be entertained, entertain me. And if you look like you're halfway entertaining, I will reward you with my attention.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I'm glad you called me out on that, because even as I was saying it, I thought it could be misinterpreted that, yeah, people who are there mostly are open and receptive, but they also have a lot of other things to see.
At the fair, yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, keeping their attention and keeping them from wandering off to get said turkey leg or refill said cup of beer is also a theatrical challenge. It put me in mind your story of playing at second base reminded me of the most Renaissance fair-like gig we ever had outside of the Renaissance Fair, which was we were booked in 1991 to do a tour of the Ulster Arts Festival, which was a series of dates at venues in Northern Ireland. This was very much during the Troubles, which we were sort of naive about. We thought, well, this is the Northern Irish Arts Council, and they're going to be taking good care of us and take us anywhere dangerous. Well, Northern Ireland was just dangerous at the time. So we stayed at the Europa Hotel in Belfast. We were told upon arrival that it was the most bombed hotel in Europe. We were playing in a town called Armagh, just across the border, which was our first gig in Northern Ireland. And we woke up in the morning and we were walking to the theater where we were performing, which was at a Catholic boys' school. And we passed lines of armed, scared-looking 18-year-old British troops with guns. And we were it was weird because none of the shops were open. It was, a Thursday or something. And we found out that there had been a murder of a priest just a few doors down from where we were, and a kneecapping by the IRA. In the next town we got to, Omagh, I think it was, we found out we were playing in a pub, actually in a room over the main floor of the pub. There was just a tiny little stage big enough for a fiddler and a band player. And there was a bar. Saw the venue and almost burst into tears because she's like, there's no backstage. Where are we supposed to do costume changes? And they told us that they would be keeping the bar open during the show. So the bar was about maybe 15 feet from the front of the stage. So it took me right back to cha-ching, cha-ching, da-ding, ba-ba-ra-ra-ra-ra. But in fact, we almost walked away, which I'm really glad we didn't, because it was possibly the most fun show we have ever done. There were only about maybe a dozen people in there, and they were all getting drunk and smoking and talking, and the audience participation section probably went on for an hour because they really wanted to participate. And we walked away from that going, never turn down a gig. You never know what it's going to turn out like. But we wouldn't have, I don't think we would have done it if it hadn't been for our experience at the fair, knowing it's okay. It's, it's like the end of the world stage. We've performed there.
Right.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Jess. This has been a pleasure. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we got good stuff. It was fun taking the trip down cobbled memory lane.
That's my January 2023 interview with Jess Winfield. If you have questions or comments to Mr. Winfield, I'd be happy to forward them on to him. If you email me at djng@earthlink.net. Questions or comments about the podcast itself can also be sent to me at djng@earthlink.net. Finally, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, please email me at djng@earthlink.net. That's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.